First speaker is going to be Michael Magill. Michael teaches financial economics and general equilibrium theory in the college. Following him is going to be Professor Yong Kim. Yong is a macroeconomist and also an expert on what's going on in the housing market. And batting cleanup is going to be Professor Robert Dickel. Robert is also a macroeconomist and is an expert on what's happened in Japan, where they had a 15-year economic malaise, which hopefully we'll manage to avoid. So, Michael, do you want to take it away?
Now, I'd like to divide the talk into three parts. The first will say something about the origin of the problem, and the things that I've highlighted, called items 1 to 3, basically are what you might call the main street or the real part of what goes on. And this has to do with the housing story. And this will be dealt with more carefully and more scientifically, if you like, by my colleague Yong. And the second part of this is what happens when the mortgage-backed securities arrive on Wall Street. That's, of course, when the fun begins. That's, if you like, how to take something real and translate it into something financial. And then we'll try and address something about what the hell you do when you get to a mess like this. And we look at three different types of solutions that have been proposed. And then we'll try and stand back. After all, you are at a university. The idea of university is that you think. Thought is supposed to clarify. Clarity is supposed to help you do better things in the future. So we're going to see if we can deduce from all of this some lessons from markets, period. So without further ado, let's get on with what's been going on. Well, of course, the guilty party in this whole exercise is the government. The government has been trying to make housing available to a very large segment of the population, which is, remember what Adam Smith said years ago, since there are economists here, do-gooders rarely do good. And the good intentions of the government actually have translated into a fiasco. So basically what they did was they even insisted that banks had to get involved in local investment to help the poorer neighborhoods invest in housing, which is fine, but it just depends on how you do it and how much you do. So let's get straight right away where some of the blame lies. They want to blame it on Wall Street, but actually you should go straight back to Congress and say, look, you guys, you've been a big part of the problem. And you know, when you get a big storm, it doesn't come from nowhere. It takes a long time to gather momentum. And this thing, an event of this magnitude, has taken many years to accumulate. 20 or more, and even more if you look back in historical perspective. So this is an accumulated mess. To further turbo the process, real markets for mortgages, Wall Street was full of innovations and decided, well, we've got a cool way of dealing with this. We'll package these amorphous things into groups of pooled securities. And we'll ship them out to Wall Street and we'll handle this stuff in a nice way. Now, you have to understand the theory helps you quite a lot very often. Innovation is fine, but innovation sometimes comes with other problems associated with it. In particular, economists understand something called moral hazard. Basically, what you did, the first step here is correct. So you, in fact, securitized, and in some sense, you put together a bunch of risks. But at the same time, you did a key thing, which is you broke the relationship between the originators and the people who were going to be taking the risks. So basically what happened was that you started offering mortgages to anybody in town who would sign on the dotted line. You didn't ask embarrassing questions about their income or anything about their credit. In fact, you just gave a mortgage to anybody who wanted to step up on the plate. So, consequences, you get borrowers who are much less qualified. Now, an important consequence is now that the demand for housing increases. So prices start to rise. At the time, it so happened that interest rates were getting credit anyway very favorable. And so you have a further, if you like, increase in demand. And so these are all the classic ingredients for a speculative bubble. Now, Now, in case you think, well, he's just telling stories, just look at the data of Case Shiller, and the sort of rough ballpark estimate here will tell you that you're around 100 here in January of 2000, and up here, this is an average for the whole of the US. You're up at 230. If you're talking about the LA, Los Angeles area, you're up to 273. Let's suppose I take 273, so that means that I've got a 160% increase over 7 years, and you've got at least 20% per annum increase in house prices. You don't have to be a born and bred economist to know that this can't be a normal rate of increase for housing. Housing should rise roughly under normal long-term conditions at the rate at which people's income is rising at the best. So, classic bubble, which then, if you like, this chapter here, okay, July of 2007. I don't want to go into it because I think that Young's going to talk about it, but in a bubble you have some fundamental real cause which is real, that causes prices to rise. The boys, knowing what they're doing, raise prices. There's a mechanism for raising prices. People outside think, oh great, the prices are rising, maybe we should get involved as well. So you get a whole lot of parties involved in the exercise that normally wouldn't be doing this kind of thing. And at some point, the exercise has to come to an end because you end up with candidates for buying these objects. And that's when the thing starts to turn sour. And that's July here of 2007. After that, you get the demise, and now we'll move on to the next. By the way, this was just to give you, this was supposed to be a picture of what interest rates are doing. And look here, at this part here, they were historically very low. All right, so real part, financial part. The guys, MBS, mortgage-backed securities, arrive on Wall Street. Welcome to part 2. Turbo in every direction. They package these objects and overlay, yes? By the way, the rating agencies are temporarily asleep and using past evidence for payoff rates to evaluate your securities. You get a bursting bubble and higher delinquency, so obviously when the bubble starts to bust, then without going into details, a lot of the people who bought these things on the expectation the prices were going to rise now find themselves in a much riskier position, and so the whole process starts to come to an end. This just says to the people who understand theory that the normal theory just doesn't work for these kind of instruments. By the way, one of the problems in this whole process is that a lot of the trading in the securities that we're talking about here were done over the counter, OTC. And so there were no organized exchanges on which a lot of this stuff was going on. And that's a good part of the problem too. So here I was going to just say something about credit markets. When you have long-lived asset, you basically have two kinds of prices. You have something which you could call the fire sale price, which is the price if you're immediately forced to sell it, which can sometimes be very bad. There's a fundamental price, which is supposed to reflect the long-run present value of the income associated with it. And a way of looking, a theoretical way of looking at a lot of what's going on here, is to understand the relationship between these two prices. I won't try to go into the details of why fire sale prices arise. It has to do with illiquidity of the market. Part of the problem was that the financial intermediaries which buy these mortgage-backed securities, it forms part of their assets. And if the value of these things falls, then they're in big trouble. So what happened was, if you like, that when times are good, the fire sale prices are close to the fundamental values, and that's roughly what they bought them for. But a little bit later, they were discovering that these damn things were not as liquid as they had thought, and all of a sudden, you've got billions of dollars that become close to nothing. So the balance sheets of a lot of these banks start to look really appalling. Banks find it difficult to make short-term, to do any kind of loans, and the whole credit mechanism basically starts to grind to a halt. Let me just say briefly something about, I seem to have lost my watch. This is incredibly user-friendly setup. It's designed to show the dangers of this whole terrain. If I try to just say a few things about what can you do with all this mess, let me say that just as we said, you have Main Street, which is the real problem, and then you have Wall Street, which is where the financial problem lies, so the solutions can be looked at in those two places. Now, you know, the well-meaning Republicans who basically had brought this thing to a nice fiasco in my first slide, basically were people who wanted Main Street to be the center of attention. Now, you have to understand that once you've got a bunch of mortgage-backed securities, you've pooled thousands of mortgages, and there's no way that you're going to go back to those original owners and try to renegotiate the terms. You have created for yourself an unsolvable problem on Main Street, in that sense, that you can't go back and renegotiate the terms except with extreme difficulty. Now, they are trying, and they do try, to do it selectively, but it's clear that this is not a universal approach that you can adopt. So, you're going to have to forget the Main Street solution. There are two sort of plans for trying to do things on the financial sector. One of them you could call the Bernanke-Paulson plan, and the other one is what I would call the equity plan. Now, the Bernanke-Paulson plan actually is extremely interesting in many ways. The idea fundamentally is to try and restore liquidity and confidence to the market. The idea is that you have a setup here where illiquidity has caused the prices of mortgage-backed securities to be close to their fire sale prices, and you'd like to find some cool way of trying to bring confidence back into the market so that actually people can realize that perhaps these things could be valued at something closer to their fundamental values. And the idea is extremely interesting from an economist's point of view, and the idea is that if the market then has broken down, maybe we can introduce a new mechanism, backed somehow by the government, that can give a jump start to the pricing. And the idea is to introduce reverse auctions so as to jump-start the process. I won't go into the details of that. That's a whole separate discussion in itself, but auctions have been extensively used and are rather remarkable incentive devices for revealing the true value of objects. And this is, in a sense, quite a historic moment, I think, in that it adds a new dimension to the kind of policy that a government could do when part of the market system breaks down. And so the idea would be that you auction off homogeneous classes of these securities. You have to arrange the auctions in a way that's careful and thoughtful. And the hope or conjecture is that after a sequence of such auctions, the prices will come much closer to the fundamental values. And in this way, you'll restore some kind of sense to the balance sheets of these intermediaries. The equity approach basically says, well, that's all very well, but I'd like to be more direct. Let's just go in and put fresh capital into these companies and take them over, buy them, as it were, for a while. This certainly increases the bank equity and their ability to lend. But one of the problems here is that in a certain sense, you haven't really got to the root problem, which is you haven't really established market values for these objects that have got misvalued, your fundamental MBS objects. It does seem that in the new document, which by the way includes virtually everything, the lavatory, the kitchen sink, windmills, other things, it's quite an extraordinary document. You thought it had to do with financial markets, but the latest 450-page document contains all your friends and the kitchen sink. And in fact, you've got to do a lot of cleaning out to find a few pages having to do with the fundamental problem. It does allow for some actions in this dimension, in the equity approach, but it's fundamentally based on the Bernanke-Paulson course and approach, which I think is a sensible way of trying to start. Now, let me just put together the last things I wanted to say. Does government intervention mean that you're giving up on markets? Well, that's what economists here, young economists, are going to be interested in. And let me say right away that the answer is no. What we do know, however, is that markets have circumstances when they don't work very well. And here you have some of the classic ingredients for, when you come to the credit markets, you have the classic ingredients for markets not working well. And that's expressed simply in the statement that there are external effects. External effects of the highest possible order, because when one company goes bankrupt, it pulls others with it, and you have a sort of classic house of cards which can start to fall down. We know as economists that there are circumstances where market systems don't work very well, and that is amongst this class of cases. Moral hazard. This has been occurring, and of course today we had a wonderful example as well. There was apparently in the New York Times, they revealed that there had been negotiations between parties that I shall not name here, that had decided that the largest investment banks, you had to be very, very big, that's the key. See? Because if you're very, very big, you can be sure that nobody's going to let you go bust, because you'll bring the rest of the system with you. But what they negotiated was that leverage ratios, which in fact by law were limited, were not to be limited if you were sufficiently large. Well, this of course is a wonderful scam. I mean, it's going to cause a major fiasco and a lot of noise, and I think it's a glorious continuation of this Fellini film. Now, the other part that is more down to earth is that this whole exercise is an example in financial innovation gone wild. It's the Wild West. You have to see it for what it is. It's the gold rush. It's craziness. It's absurdness. You had enormous sums of money being traded without any kind of regulatory functions, without any kind of rules of the game. You had some of the largest financial intermediaries with leverage ratios close to 30, which, I mean, okay, so long-term capital was able to beat that by going to 50. But look folks, this is irresponsible to the highest degree. It's something that should never have been allowed. If it had not been allowed, all this fiasco would probably never have happened. So just let me say the last thing then. You need to leave room for innovation. America is a country of innovation. And the great thing about America is that people do learn by their mistakes. This is a process of learning by doing. Securitization is probably a good idea, but moral hazard is there forever. And so you have to learn how to regulate these markets. And in particular, you have to introduce organized markets, like you have futures contracts. So you should have contracts for these things that are currently the CDOs and all these mortgage-backed securities. The CDSs, which are even turbos, wonderful stuff. You know, how to really get crazy. The reason most of the banks got involved in CDSs is precisely because they didn't know what the hell the other transactions that the banks were involved with. If they had a central clearinghouse, they wouldn't have needed to get involved with the CDSs. And finally, then, I suppose you could say that what you've got to do is to use the markets, but regulate them more carefully, and don't let the guys with the big money just get away with doing whatever they want.